Welcome to I Have Some Questions. The show is all about asking questions our guests have never asked themselves before, never thought about, or been too afraid to explore. It's designed to uncover the human story at the root of successes and failures and help us as an audience learn and grow from that story. My hope is that you'll hear brilliant guests exploring new ideas and challenging themselves in new ways of thinking. I think this makes for great conversations. I'm going to bring on entrepreneurs, authors, coaches, scientists, and frankly, any vein of super interesting, successful, and passionate human I can find. I am fascinated by passionate people, and I have some questions for them. I'm Erik Berglund, and I hope you'll join me every week for new episodes. Hey, welcome back to I Have Some Questions. I'm Erik Berglund, and this episode is a review of the interview I did last week with Monique Lecomte. I've sat back and thought about it a little bit. I wanted to share with you some of the things that stuck with me in a shorter version here. If you haven't already given it a listen, I highly recommend going and spending, 60, 80 minutes. I don't remember exactly how long that interview was with me and Monique, because she has a really cool story to tell. You know, I'm going to hit a few of the high notes here, but Monique's story really starts in rural Alabama, and she learns a tremendous number of lessons over the course of her career. But one of them that we focused on a lot was being really adaptable and nimble as leaders, and how important it is to recognize that a one-size-fits-all, my experiences told me to do it this way type attitude doesn't really serve very well. Monique's got a great story of learning that herself, and that's a huge part of what she helps leaders learn today, is how to actually be that adaptable, nimble leader, someone who's capable of recognizing the individual humanity and skills of the people that you're employing, and leveraging that observations into something that unlocks their potential. I had a lot of fun chatting with her about how important that is as a leader, and it's something that certainly resonates with what I do with the language of leadership, and so I hope you'll give it a listen for that reason. She also has this fun history of zigging when others zag. I mean, if you listen to her story, she just describes multiple moments where it was obvious that everybody else was turning left, and therefore she was pretty interested in checking out what's going on over on the right side. Simple example, when she was going through school, she chose to be a designer. Again, she grew up in rural Alabama. She grew up with a pretty hard upbringing, it sounds like, and she chose to be a designer. That's not exactly an obvious path for someone who comes from that background. And then as she was going through it, she had this observation of how many people were steering into what she considered boring aspects of it. Not bad, just uninteresting to her. Safe spaces like kitchen and bath and things along those lines. And she wanted to explore something different. She saw a different angle that would be more interesting and valuable, and really didn't want to do what everybody else was doing, and so decided to differentiate her career. That decision, her willingness to lean into something that on the surface might be less interesting, like designing office spaces and the built environment around it and furniture in those spaces, just not necessarily what's attractive to others in that space, is where she found an enormous amount of opportunity. And in so doing, really differentiated herself and created the entire rest of her career out of those types of decisions. Just has a history of doing that. And I love that she's an example of you don't have to do the obvious thing. It was fun to investigate that a little bit with her. And the third piece is a broader thing that just was overall present in my conversation with her. And that's, she really leans into her origin story. And that's what a lot of this podcast is about. I mean, I spend a decent amount of time asking people about why they made the decisions they made and where that really stems from. And usually if you go deep enough, there's something in the origin story about most of us that allows other people, when listening to it, to really appreciate what it is that got us to where we are. And Monique's a great example of that. And if you look at her book, another example of how she zigs when others zag is like, you all can't see it, I'm holding it right now, but her book, The Expert Generalist, just looks like a beautiful coffee table type book. Like it's something that belongs in a really nice restaurant waiting room or in a really nice furniture art gallery. Like something you just kind of want to open it and flip through it. You can't help it. And as you do so, there's interesting graphics and ways to tell stories that are just so different than most books. But this whole book is about her origin story. And most of us, frankly, have something in our origin story that's unique. I think she might have a little bit more than the average bear, but she really leans into, so many people would maybe prefer to not lean into the hard parts of their origin story, maybe to let those stories go untold. And that might be fair. But Monique's a great example of the kind of, if you can't fix it, feature it type attitude. Many of the rough stories that she learned in her childhood have so much value because she got through them and because she had the willingness to look in the mirror and maybe make some hard observations and adaptations based on that origin story that others might have shied from or hid from. It takes a big person to be willing to do that. And I just think the conversation she had about how important it is to lean into that story, to explore it, to learn from it, and then turn it into an asset, because that's exactly what she does. She literally has an asset in the form of her book that is her upbringing in rural Alabama and development into the professional world. I just think that's a cool story, and I loved reflecting on how valuable that could be. And it made me, do a little scouring of myself and go, where did my interest in some of the things that I do stem from? And yeah, most of the interesting things that I do, things that I think are interesting, have an origin story in my childhood. I don't have a book about it like Monique does, but I suspect if you investigate yourself, you might find some of the same. And I suspect that if you went back and gave this whole episode a listen, you would enjoy it. So I hope you'll take the time, go back, listen to that episode. And if not, I hope you learned a couple things from the interview and this brief recap of the conversation I had with Monique Lecomte. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us this week. Don't forget to take a second and subscribe. Maybe even share this episode with somebody it made you think of, or someone you think would take some value from it. This show is all about uncovering the brilliance and humanity of high performers. And whether those performers have a massive following or a podcast or a book, or they're a business owner, or they're buried somewhere in a corporation, or maybe they're a nonprofit leader, or, they don't necessarily have to have a title. I'm really fascinated by people who are passionate and who are doing interesting things. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email at hello@languageofleadership.io to make that connection. I'll see you next week.